The first game, where it all started, maybe in something of a literal sense for me. I have a damn hard time remembering life before it. It's the first that made such a large impression on me, it was just seemingly always there. Which means I don't remember the exact moment I first played it. That does make it interesting to write about. Personally, I've never heard anyone say, or maybe rather anyone admit this when doing a retrospective. I'm aware it was the first game I played, and that the Genesis was given by a family friend since he didn't use it much. The exact emotions that were felt, and the experiences had of that first experience, are flying through the winds of time beyond reach. The TV you see here is the one from my memory I first played on, key term being from my memory. I modeled this set based on it. I never found the exact one I had online, but that's really how nostalgia works, right? It's always a bit hazy. I might have saw it and didn't even know it. You see, video games are even now such a young medium, there is many people who are old enough to remember clearly their first time playing one. But at some point it becomes like asking someone the first TV show they saw. Few would actually know. However, for myself, video games came into my life right as my brain started becoming capable of forming proper memories. Now, as for Sonic 1, it came out in 1991. It was given to me in '94 along with Mortal Kombat and Outlander, and of course the system itself. What does all this mean in terms of a retrospective with imperfect memories? Well, let's find out. Even with the rampant overuse of Green Hill in recent years Sega has pelted us with, it's still easy to see why it became an iconic stage. The checkerboard patterns, the pseudo 3D palm trees, and dancing flowers set the stage for a great adventure. It really felt cutting edge, with the goal likely being to mimic what Silicon 3D hardware was putting out at the time. Really makes you think of blast processing. Early screenshots like the one shown here in Electronic Gaming Monthly show the scenery being much darker. Great that they brightened it up to make it much more welcoming. The magazine also calls him Sonic Hedgehog, not Sonic the Hedgehog. They are just very confused in general based on this blurb. Also seems they removed foreground objects. Those will only come to appear in Starlight Zone. The stage also shows off what Sonic was marketed on. Going fast without slow precision platforming, and waiting around for platforms to move for you. At least not much. The spaces are more open and encourage the player to keep moving. The ground isn't quite flat nearly anywhere, and you will quickly notice Sonic's movement physics react to the angle, showing that you can take advantage of this and gain momentum. And damn does it feel good when you can make full use of the environment to leap to different routes and reach greater heights. Who can forget the tunnel that launches you sky high into a large group of rings? If you didn't realize the momentum yet, you sure did now. The zone prepares the player by exposing them to many hazards and gimmicks in safe ways. Crumbling ground, moving platforms, item boxes, bottomless pit. They manage to squeeze almost everything into these 3 acts. And on reading about the development, they redid this stage multiple times over the course of the cycle, and spent the longest time reworking Green Hill. A feature that shows this fact is there is multiple walls that can be broken by spinning into them while running. This is a feature that is rarely made use of throughout the game. Yeah, the spin dash wasn't a proper move yet. To me this indicates it was one of the last stages made, if not the last. They had fully come to understand what they wanted Sonic to be at this point and designed Green Hill around it. The ring system was an ingenious way to further this concept of speed too. The player can feel confident in taking risks knowing if they got even one ring they won't die. Well, for most things anyhow. Falling into bottomless pits and getting squished will do you in instantly. Or the infamous double spike glitch. You see, when you get hit you gain invulnerability frames like most games. However, if you hit spikes within this you'll die anyway. The only thing in the game like this, and considering spikes usually come in pairs or even rows, if you hit one you're probably dead. Something that didn't get overused from this stage is its boss, the Egg Wrecker. It's a quick fight you're unlikely to even get touched by if you just crouch in the corner. Why does the ball flicker so much? I don't know. Funny enough, they made it do that again in Sonic Advance years later, when it appeared as a short fight. I guess it was intentional? First impressions matter. Sonic Team knew this and they sure exceeded them. Those feelings and sense of awe I experienced back then very well changed the path of my life, or at least my hobbies anyway. And with such a strong opening act, it's easy to see why. Marble Zone's grass is the same sprite as Green Hill's. It likely was used for convenience sake, but it gives a bit of continuity between the two stages. I like that. The short outdoor section sets the scene great with platforms that dip into the lava when landing on them, causing fire to slowly burn across. A nice bit of foreshadowing. But this quickly becomes what is likely my least favorite level in the game. Its tunnels are slow-paced with obstacles every few steps. This more greatly resembles the usual standard puzzle platformers that came up to this point. Pushing blocks onto switches to raise platforms or ride them across lava. And the riding. It lasts quite a while. There is ways around a few of them, one grabbing an invincibility box and running through the lava, then another with some platforming. The blocks do respawn at least if you fall down, so that's nice. To add some sort of praise to this section, the background really has a great feeling of depth. The ancient Greek-style carvings and barred openings add a unique atmosphere. There's so many small touches everywhere you look. The glowing flambeaus, the detailed frames, the broken pillars. The gameplay of the level's design might not be amazing, but the atmosphere sure is. There originally was going to be UFOs in the sky, as can be seen in the prototype featured in the movie Wayne's World. Why aliens are in the ruins? I don't know. As an aside, I always liked how you can make Sonic jump while still in his walking animation if you're against a wall, or jump from the top of a moving object on occasion. I'm still not sure the exact method for doing it, but nonetheless can manage it rather consistently. It always put a bit of a smile on my face when I did it. This stage in particular seemed the easiest to make it execute. It does introduce a tradition to the series, the chase sequence with the lava chase, although it's far too slow to be a threat. By the way, what are these big green cylinders supposed to be? Whatever it is, it can move through lava without melting. It always made me wonder. It looks like it's glass with pillars inside. Boss this time is, well, easy again. Just jump between the two platforms and you'll be safe. This will be a reoccurring fact with them. The bosses are for sure the easiest part of the game. In fact, you can attack Robotnik the majority of the time, multiple times before he can even pull out his weapon, which is another aspect that will quickly change in future games. So yeah, Marble Zone. I'm just glad to be past it. Spring Yard founds a tradition that continues on even to this day in the series, the pinball theme. As a kid, I never picked up on the fact this was pinball inspired. The theme was not nearly as heavily embraced as in future games. I always thought it was a fair, carnival, or maybe a theme park, which I guess is well enough. The pinball features tend to be merged with those in the futures. This stage has, in my opinion, the most beautiful palette of colors in the game. The somewhat muted reds, purples, and yellows that contrasts very organically with Sonic and the Badniks. The music really adds to the atmosphere, matching a fun Saturday evening at the fair. Fair. Maybe the music also made me think of that. The inspiration of pinball and Sonic was an obvious connection to make, even if the medium never quite caught on in Japan. The dude curls up into a ball just like one. Bumpers, springs, and steep slopes knocking you around or affecting your momentum. And in this first entry, they saw these objects more as obstacles than something to use to your advantage. The bumper physics in this one I find aren't as predictable and can't be used with confidence for tricks. You'll mostly get bounced around uncontrollably, and there isn't enough of them, I suppose, to try and really experiment with. Hold up. Does that say cope? Boy, is that we're taking on a different vibe with time. I always found it amusing how Sonic goes way off kilter on the steep slopes in Spring Yard. As a whole, the design in this stage is a big step up from Marble Zone, with speed set pieces sprinkled in with some tight platforming in between. Interestingly, this was the first stage designed by the team, so they clearly had a pretty good vision of what they wanted Sonic to be. I assume they experimented with the more standard platforming after this to compare? The only minor element I really dislike is the roller badniks. They are just annoying in how they wrap back around the screen after going off the right, and can be only hit when they come out of the ball for a brief second. Also, the boxes you have to wait to go up and down on. There isn't many of them, but sometimes it can look like the gap is big enough to squeeze through, and you end up crushed. The boss is, of course, weak, but I won't hold that against the stage. Every boss in this game is disgustingly simple. This one almost has no chance of even harming you. At least he can be ended fast. I actually waited around as a kid to see if he'd pick up every block, and yes, he in fact can. Overall, it's a fun and great looking stage that gives some insight into what the devs were thinking. Now that we're at the halfway point, I might as well address special stages. And this is probably a controversial take, but special stages are always my least favorite part of any Sonic game they are featured in. I can at least see the appeal of them in some games like 2, 3, or Triple Trouble, but find them a grind to do. In Sonic 1, they are kind of a mess. It all takes place in an abstract maze that constantly rotates, and your goal is to find the Chaos Emerald hidden in it. You can't control the rotation, and it's not always very stable. It moves in a motion more like a ticking clock than a smooth arc. It's sort of difficult to describe how frustrating this is to play. Every time you make a bit of progress, well, the maze just turned again and you're falling the wrong way, and you often can't see where the path you're looking at lead. So there's blind jumps, they could lead to a goal. If this happens, you're falling straight into it and blowing your chance. Yes, in this case, hitting a goal means a loss. There is blocks you can touch that could help with this in the maze. The R ones reverse the stage rotation, and the up and down ones speed up or slow down the rotation. But I honestly can't tell the difference as far as the speed ones. However, you're most likely going to just be falling into them by mistake and feeling annoyed. But its biggest offense, in my opinion, is the requirements to even access the special stages. You need to bring 50 rings to the end of the act. Only acts 1 and 2, mind you. It's easy enough in the first couple of stages, but you quickly find yourself needing to be overly cautious and can't take risks with speed. Unless it naturally happens, I just don't bother aiming for the emeralds, and I never got all 6 as a kid. Next up is the most famously notorious stage, Labyrinth Zone. But I'll be honest, I don't think it's that bad. Yes, it's another slowed down platformer level, and yet not as slow as Marble Zone. I get it. Water levels are bad in any game. Take the basic gameplay and cut the speed in half. Always a bad idea. But at least in Sonic's case, his walk is the normal speed of other games. Whereas something? Maybe, maybe not. Depending on your perspective, and it's not much of a defense, I guess. At least you don't have to stand on top of lava blocks and wait for them to move. That probably says something about the development of this game too. They were still experimenting with what they knew from the trends of the time. They even included a full water level in puzzles, despite the fact it goes against the entire gameplay concept. But you know what does help this level? The groove and beach music. It sure makes things fun and mosey along much smoother. I just adore it with the simulated harpsichord, really showing off the Yamaha chip in this stage. Man, it just makes the stage for me, I gotta say. Thankfully, it makes things smoother because there is a rather steep increase in difficulty in Labyrinth Zone. Underwater is littered with multiple kinds of spikes, even downward facing ones that make for some tight jumps. Burrow bots that can be sneaky, although you can see their nose. The Unidasu spike enemies that are made twice as painful since you're slowed down. And of course the most infamous created tradition, air bubbles. The countdown music for drowning became an instant icon in the series and is well known beyond even the fan base itself. In this one, the bubbles are placed very generously, and personally I find I can grab them for the most part naturally while moving through the stage. The set design for the stage is rather conservative, but I dig the hanging vines and the coral pieces that dot the landscape. The change in color when going underwater is a nice touch. The carvings though, an owl, an octopus, and Robotnik's face. Huh. The boss fight in the stage is at least trying to be unique, I guess, but it's not really a boss fight. Robotnik just flies up higher and you do some tight platforming. Something interesting, I actually have a weird memory with this one. I often at first think the boss loops around infinitely until defeated, but he doesn't. Maybe I had a lot of trouble with this one and that's why I think it? Or possibly it's a Mandela effect and during my childhood I was on another timeline. Either or. Anywho, you don't need to destroy Robotnik. In fact, trying to hit him will very likely bounce you into a hazard and die. If you pace yourself and only move at a brisk pace, you can get to the top even with the water rising. Most people probably remember this as so difficult because they were under the impression Robotnik had to be defeated. All in all, water will be much better utilized in future games as a punishment mechanic, or being heavily minimized. You know, I think I finally figured out why I like this better than Marble Zone. Labyrinth is difficult, but interesting. Marble Zone is just boring. But you know what's not boring? Starlight Zone, my favorite stage in the game. This time it's back to the more open speed sections. I'm starting to see a pattern here. Green Hill, momentum based. Marble Zone, slower platforming. Spring Yard, momentum. Labyrinth Zone, slower. Now we're back to momentum with Starlight. Guess they had a plan after all for pacing. This is a brisk romp before the final act. A siesta, so to speak. The music is chill and it feels like a late, clear summer night in the city. This is another stage I didn't quite recognize. I'm not sure why, since there is barricades right at the beginning. Like, I knew it was a city, but not one under construction. Also, these fans you can run into just mystify me. They just don't let you turn around. How is this small fan doing that to Sonic? Not that they can't boost you too, even faster than springs if you come from behind. In fact, this zone actually has the sections where you can likely pick up the most speed in the entire game, plus a bit of spice of some tighter platforming. But not in the way that you need to slow down for once you get some skill. A few moving platforms there, some enemies to dodge there, the seesaws, the rotating platforms that would become a series staple. In fact, I'd even say Starlight is the level that's most like Sonic 2 or 3. The layout of the level just strikes me as having all the features. You're encouraged to gain speed and launch yourself off ramps in the path to great height, to find new routes. Tunnels of enemies or platforms are placed just right to break up the speed sections. The seesaws would be an on and off used mechanic throughout the series and work well as a natural extension of the momentum mechanic. And to top it off, it's got a proper boss, or at least one that's got an interesting gimmick. Robotnik this time is out of range to hit freely. In fact, he's so high he goes off the screen a bit. You've got to use those seesaws we were just discussing to hit him. Jump on one side after he drops the mines to sling them right back at him. It's smart, interesting, and so natural because it makes use of a skill taught to you in the level. Easily the best boss in the game. Easy, but creative. Starlight has the whole package for just the right amount of challenge to not be stressful. For a smooth ride to the final act. It's the calm before the storm. The electric energy is in the air, but you're taking in the sights, sounds, and smells. Even its placement is perfect. To think it was originally going to be the fourth zone. All that is why Starlight is my favorite in the game. But now, the storm is here. Or at least it looks like one, with those smokestacks billowing out smoke to coat the sky. They even have the smoke fully animated. Not even Marble Zone had animation in the background. Unfortunately, you can't see it till the very end of the stage. Yes, the background moving down does give the sensation of climbing a tower, but the animated smokestack is why you can't get a Chaos Emerald and Scrap Brain. He's using up the VRAM. That's the real pollution happening here. Acts 1 and 2 actually have unique backgrounds and sprites from each other, which is a nice touch for the final zone and gives a sense of player progression. This stage probably makes the most obvious use of multiple routes, starting off with a switch you can use to reverse the direction of a turnstile to take different routes. This continues on with doorways and the speed tubes in Act 2. This might be the devs' way of encouraging replayability and making the player aware of the fact there is multiple routes. Of course, I doubt most people beat the game on the first run as a kid. Maybe it just fits the theme. The first act is quite tricky with lots of disappearing and rotating platforms. Seriously, I have such a difficult time hitting this particular set of them. I always feel terrible at the game here. And these side platforms coming in to crush Sonic look so intimidating, but are far less dangerous than the boxes in Spring Yard. At least these ones don't lull you into a false sense of security. The bombs the ball haul Badniks drop just keeps going and going and going, down 2 whole ramps. It does make sense actually, since the devs would want their activation early, because they are placed on these vertical ramps. Just when you think about it, they are a lot more than the average Badnik. Act 2 has you entering Robotnik's fortress. Again, it's great visual progression for the final stage of the journey. and starts off with a gimmick that I don't believe ever comes back in the series. These spinning gears that Sonic can attach to by running. You can roll and jump off them really high with momentum. Actually, now that I think about it, the glowing spheres in the bonus stage in Sonic and Knuckles has the same mechanic. Shame it's not around more. The speed tubes here make the act almost maze-like because they fling you around the different floors, even going backwards. We will see these return in Sonic 2. When you reach the end of this act, you see Robotnik standing behind an energy barrier. This is technically the first cutscene in the entire series. We wouldn't see another in-stage cutscene until Sonic 3. Robotnik hits a switch, and you fall helplessly into Labyrinth Zone Act 4. Okay, it's actually called Scrapped Brain Act 3, but everyone knows this Labyrinth Act 4. This stage might be the biggest reason everyone hates Labyrinth Zone. If you don't outrace the platform moves at the beginning of the act anyway. Woo! Are you in for a long, long slog? I do get what the devs were going for. The final stretch of a game should require some willpower, and even mentally drain the player a bit. It helps give a sense of accomplishment after, but not at half speed on a stage that's already massive. There isn't a lot to discuss here. Like I said, it's effectively Labyrinth Act 4. No new gimmicks. However, you can avoid practically the entire level if you outrun the platform at the very beginning and don't drop down either of the gaps that come soon after. This stage can actually be beaten in less than a minute. It's like they knew no one wanted this. Falling down the first gap will force you to play around half the stage, and the second gap, maybe an eighth. I actually did this shortcut the first time I made it here without knowing it. I saw the platform roll, and I just wanted to beat it. Since I was a kid, no mind was paid to it being so short. This is finally it. After a possibly long detour, nothing stands between Sonic and Robotnik. And oh boy, do I wish I could say it's a huge showdown. You might notice there is no rings here. However, it's far easier than it looks. It's mostly a matter of patience. You can play this safe by standing off to one side and hoping Robotnik appears on one of the two pistons you can access. Or you can stand in the middle and dodge his piston if it happens to come down on you and then hit him much more easy. But it requires a bit more skill. After he appears, some sparks will show up top and very slowly target you. But you can just run to the other side or even jump through them. It does get a unique theme that's fittingly dramatic, although repetitious. After the usual 8 hits, he goes down, and quite the explosion this time. He runs to the egg mobile and tries to escape. Make sure you give him a quick tap for good luck. Ah, that feels good. Despite the way it describes this final boss, retroactively as a kid, it was a massive sigh of relief to beat the game, and it sure did feel like a battle well won. I do this weird move where I'd crouch and jump over the sparks rather than just running to the opposite side. I believe I even hit on the left side, which is a lot more claustrophobic and allows far less of a chance to attack Robotnik. The game as a whole tops off with a cutscene, and you know what? It's pretty damn good. It shows the player what they've accomplished. The animals have been freed, gone home to Green Hill to celebrate Sonic's victory. So now the question is, what was this game's reception? Well, unsurprisingly, very positive. The June 1991 issue of GamePro, with a very strange big-nosed Sonic on the cover, gave it 4.5 soy faces out of 5, saying no Genesis cart squeezes more out of running and jumping than Sonic, with the lesser one being the sound. I just can't agree with that even in hindsight. This game has got some damn good music. This review also refers to Robotnik as the hovercraft dude. It has an interesting screenshot of Labyrinth Zone. The background is mostly black with rocks going into the distance on the floor and the ceiling creating depth. Video Games and Computer Entertainment gave it a 9 out of 10, and if you read the review it sounds rather middling, with praise on seemingly everything but the gameplay, even calling it a Mario clone, and that there's nothing to hide the fact Sonic is one of them. I guess platformers still weren't considered an established genre, though half the game being slower didn't help. I do agree those special stages are disorienting though. Whoa, a demo floppy! For those who loved that old media fight between Mario and Sonic, Games X UK had a 3-page spread all about it, pitting Sonic 1 against Super Mario World. It starts with rightly pointing out the difference in the number of levels, and that Mario has more variety in gameplay, but do appear to enjoy the graphics more in Sonic, It also spends an inordinate amount of time explaining how the power-ups are similar and how the rings are like mushrooms. An actual gameplay function, I don't know about that, but it's the closest comparison if you have to. The roundup at the end from the reviewers are more interesting. John and Nick have high hopes for Sonic over the sequels, pointing out Mario has had multiple games and that this is a great first step for him. Alex was a bit more pessimistic, saying Sega have a lesson to learn from Mario in terms of playability. In that, I don't expect to purchase a game for £40 and complete it in under 2 days. That I can certainly agree with. They concluded with giving both 5 X's out of 5, with Sonic getting a lower lastability rating in the breakdown. Over in Japan, Beat Mega Drive gave it 3 9s and a 10. Despite the name, this does not appear to be an official Sega magazine. The first reviewer said the bosses made them cry a little. Maybe some people do find them difficult after all. The second one notes that it's Mario-like, but has its own personality thanks to the unique graphics and speed mechanics. Then follows with, they have a little dissatisfaction with the music. I guess I'm in the minority with the soundtrack after all. The Perfect Score says it competes with Mario as an action game and that there is no time limit, which makes it nice for beginners. There is actually a time limit, but with it being 10 minutes versus Mario's 5, there might as well not be one at all. It also notes that you can complete the levels artistically if you get skilled. The final review states it's very American-like with its characters and movement all over the screen. It's essentially the video game version of Tom and Jerry and feels like a new era for Sega. On the side of the lower ratings was Video Games Germany, giving it a 79 for gameplay, which was corrected to an 82% in the following issue I read elsewhere. They actually split the rating for music and sound effects, which makes sense to do. A real note here is the prototype screenshots. Marble Zone still has the UFOs and looks oddly empty in the other one, with nothing blocking the lava in the ceiling. Spring Yard has a completely different background and a sign reading "Good luck, not in the final game." Now, what's your score, you might be asking? I'm not much for a numerical score, but looking back on it, I really wasn't bothered by the length. Back then, I believe it took a few months for me to reach the end, mostly due to the lack of a save feature. Plus, as kids, we all usually just had a handful of games and kept replaying them. Now, if I was an adult and paid $50 USD for a short game, I'd have ended up disappointed, I'd assume. Keep in mind, that's like $115 USD today at the time of this video. I would be disappointed, but expectations are different. Many games were this length and sold at such a price or even higher back then. They just had difficulty spikes or plain unfair mechanics to artificially make it last longer. The fact Sonic 1 doesn't have such a terrible difficulty spike is actually a plus, in my opinion at least. I was never a fan of Nintendo hard, as my fellow boomers call it. Back then I still returned to Sonic 1 even after getting 2 and 3. It was a great first entry even with its flaws and trying to mimic the standard platformers of the day for half the stages. And these levels weren't terrible on their own, just bad in comparison to what Sonic's strengths were, since they didn't take advantage of them. It was like hitting a wall, in this case at the speed of sound. In the end, we are taking into consideration the game as a whole, and in this particular case, retroactively. However, does looking at it retroactively mean we don't take the time it released into context at all? I don't know for sure. The answer to that is likely different for everyone. In my own case, I did grow up in the 90s, and it's the first game I played. There's no change in that fact even when I try to look at it completely objectively. So for me, it's a mix of the two. Sonic Team simply hadn't figured out how to fully take advantage of this unique momentum mechanic yet they had designed. But the game does have great, appealing graphics with a unique style that really make you think blast processing was being used. The sense of speed is there, and it's possible to do some cool stunts if you can manage to gain it. It's still a fun game even with the hiccups. I'm going to rate this series the proper way we all do today, with a tier list. This sort of ranking will put it into context with other Sonic games. It's in the spirit of this series. I'll place this at a solid rank B. It doesn't reach the amazing heights some future games would, but it's still a great time and an amazing first entry. Like John and Nick said back in 1991 in Games X UK, it was a great first step, and we have a lot to look forward to. You thought I forgot the true end, didn't you? Hey there, thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe. That's all for this time, folks. See you in the next one.